So a big part of Google culture, for context, folks who don't come from the technology background, right, is this idea of an agile culture. And an agile culture is a culture where you iterate very quickly and you take a lot of chances and you try things out, right, and move quickly. And so for someone who likes, sort of like this job where you're consistently doing the same thing over a very long period of time and there's not a lot of ambiguity and there's not a lot of change, they're going to have a little bit of a tougher time at Google just because consistency isn't what you're going to get, right?
Yeah. I'm Chris Bussing. Welcome to my channel. It's committed to helping more people create a life of freedom and impact through success in tech sales and the pursuit of self-development. My guest today, Bruno Rodriguez, was one of my first ever mentors at Google Cloud. He's a field seller at Google Cloud. He's managed SDRs, and he had an incredible journey with some bumps and bruises along the way to get into Google. And he's going to share with you today what it takes to actually work for a company like Google. It's going to be great stuff. You're going to be encouraged, motivated, and you're going to come away with actionable tips to create an amazing career in tech sales. If you guys get value out of the video, of course, give the like button a love tap because the YouTube algorithm loves that too and will show this video to more people who could benefit from the message. And subscribe to the channel. All right, guys, let's dig into it. Bruno, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing on this fine morning?
I'm doing fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm excited to dig into the topics of today.
Let's dig into it, baby. Word on the street is you had a tumultuous journey getting to Google, but you did it. So talk about your backstory getting into tech and getting into Google Cloud.
Sure. I mean, to start, I would have to go back to my childhood. So I've had a lot of influence in my life throughout while I was growing up, mainly because my parents were working in the tech sector. So we moved from Brazil to Canada when I was really young, about 8 years old, which is, probably one of the most defining points in my life. And my parents both got jobs in tech, right? So my dad was working for Compaq, worked for HP. My mom worked for Compaq as well, and IBM. And so tech was always part of our family's DNA to a certain extent. And so as I was growing up, my mom would play video games and got me into playing video games. And
that's a cool mom.
Yeah, no, she was dope when we were younger.
Yeah. When you were younger? Now, yeah.
She's fun now too. Yeah, she's a blast.
Yeah.
She started getting into video editing and she started building her own computers. And so that kind of got me interested into that as well. And so whenever I first graduated college, I was a little bit lost, right? Trying to figure out where to go. So I talked to my dad and I was like, Dad, I'm not sure what I want to do now, but I do eventually want to build the skills that I need in order to start my own company, right? Be an entrepreneur, be a CEO. And the feedback that he gave me was, well, if you want to be a CEO, then you have to go work in sales. I was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why? Right? And so he went into it. It's like, well, if you work in a sales department, you essentially get exposure to every part of a company, right? You work with the marketing team to run campaigns and follow up on campaigns. You work with the legal team to review contracts. You work with finance to define deal terms, right? You work with engineering to validate products and process and things like that. And so I didn't really question it. I kind of just accepted it wholeheartedly and figured out that, the most likely path for me to get to where I want to go would be to start with sales and build up the skills that I needed to build. Another thing that he instilled in me was the idea that a complex sale is better than a simple sale because one, the skills that you're going to develop are going to be more valuable in the long run. And two, the deal sizes tend to be a little bit bigger. Right?
Come on. Money.
That's where the money comes from. Yeah. And so, you could either, let's say, sell, a house or 10 houses. You could sell insurance, right? And, build a book of 300, 1,000 insurance policies and grow that over time. Or you can close one data center deal that might net you, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on where you sell and your commission plan and all those things, right? Can't say I'm making, $1 million a commission check quite yet.
Yeah, not yet.
I'll get there one day. But, financial independence is definitely something that sales has given me, right? And I'm very appreciative of.
So how big do the deal sizes get realistically in the world of Google Cloud?
I mean, so it depends on the segment naturally, right? And the size of the business. So if you're talking about our select accounts, which is our global 150 or so, Maybe it's going up to 200 soon.
Quick pause. Is a select account like Uber or Snapchat like the biggest companies in the world where there's like one, like, can you describe what select segment is?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can take a step back. So whenever you design a sales org, particularly in the technology space, if you're selling enterprise software, you typically need to break down your market based on complexity and velocity, right? More or less. And so companies will typically build teams around these different go-to-market areas. And so the way the nomenclature within Google, right, is Select is the global top 150 largest organizations. The segment underneath that is enterprise, which is, anyone, let's say, over $1 billion in revenue, right, type of thing. We also break it down into corporate, which is what we call our mid-market segment. And then, of course, right, we have SMB, which is sort of, the everything else, more or less, right? Early stage startups, smaller businesses, those kinds of things. And so, I mean, if you're in the select space, right, these deals can be, over $1 billion or
Unbelievable
$100 million a year, which is insane. The segment that I'm in is the corporate segment, right?
Yes.
And so that's more the mid-market business. I work a lot more with what we call digital natives, which is, companies founded usually within the last 10 years. They have some sort of external funding or validation through like a accelerator, Techstars being a good example, right? And so our deal sizes are going to be in the hundreds of thousands to the millions, right? You do hear once in a while where someone in our segment, usually on the West Coast, right? Or Chicago or New York type of thing. But, folks have closed, let's say, $20 million deals or even $100 million plus deals. It's not as common, right? Because typically those accounts will be in the enterprise segment or they get pulled up there once they hit a certain level of maturity and consumption. But it's not a bad deal, right? Because when you compare that to, let's say, some of the more volume-based sales jobs that, even I've had before, our average deal sizes back then was like 10,000, 12,000. So you'd have to do, 100 deals in a year, for example, for you to, make good commission. Whereas, in the cloud space, with it being more complex, with it being larger deal sizes, 12K, right? I might see that from an account in a month, type of thing, right?
What's amazing about the space that you're in and that I was in previously at Google is that you have people making $1 million plus. I'm not saying everyone is, but even in the corp segment, which I was also in, I had a teammate who made $2 million. Wow. Believe it or not. I think she closed like a $50 million deal with a private equity firm. So the fact that you're swimming in that pond where it's possible to make that much money is amazing. Like, you're in such a good place. And it's exciting for the audience to hear about where they might need to get to be able to rake in the big bucks if they're money motivated, if they're trying to create a life of freedom versus selling, some like $100 a month subscription to SMBs and like mom and pop manufacturing shops. You're not going to be able to make that same type of cash. Why is the cloud space such an exciting place to sell? And what is the cloud? I mean, you're technical. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on cloud, why it's awesome, where it's heading.
Absolutely. So I think the most simple way to put this, right, is the cloud is just somebody else's computer, and you access it over the internet to do something that you needed to do, right? It's normally going to be to run some sort of application that's related to your business, either providing some sort of critical function to the business, right? Or something that's externally facing that you provide to customers that they can access and use. Social media is a good example of that. E-commerce is a good example of that, right? Your mobile banking app is another great example of, what's something that could be a cloud application. What's really powerful and interesting about cloud is that you get the same sort of like complexity and sales cycle complexity and deal size as you would normally see in traditional IT contracts. But that complexity comes with the caveat of the shared responsibility model, right? So for folks not familiar with the concept of the shared security or a shared responsibility model within the cloud space, it's essentially the idea that depending what kind of technology you're using, what kind of solution you're deploying, right? The cloud vendor themselves will take responsibility of, building out the infrastructure, maintaining it secure from a physical perspective, right? Making sure it has power, making sure it has cooling, all the sort of like site reliability, engineering type things that you would normally expect a data center team to handle. And so what that means is that folks that do build on cloud, right, rather than having to build entire teams and practices and playbooks on running data centers, they can focus all of their energy on extracting value from the technology, right? And so what does this mean in the world of Google Cloud? It means that, instead of just buying a server, right, and deploying it, which you can do with literally any cloud provider or, co-location company in the world, they're also building in technologies to help you take advantage of things like cloud, right? So what does that mean? Machine learning and AI, right? Everyone's obsessed with that right now. That requires a lot of data, right, to build a high quality model. And then you need to integrate that model into an application so that it can be used, right? So if you're trying to, let's say, unify data across systems that are distributed all over the world, if these systems are deployed in a physical data center, right, there might be no real easy way to pull all of that data somewhere and centralize it. And it might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years, it might never happen, right? Because executives change and then priorities change too.
Yeah.
Whereas in the cloud, everything is within the reach of the internet, right? And Google Cloud in particular, because they do have a global network, because their entire cloud infrastructure is accessible from a central console, and you can spin up, right, a multi-regional network like this. It comes default out of the box. It's very, very easy to manipulate data across multiple environments. And then, for example, build a data warehouse, right, that centralizes data from all of your different source systems, right, whether it's point of sale, whether it's marketing campaign or Google Ads for that matter, right, customer relationship management systems like Salesforce, pulling in that client data, unifying it, and then, doing prediction and analytics on it, right? Let's forecast sales for the next quarter or two, right? Based on that, let's forecast inventory. Where do we have gaps in our inventory? Oh, okay. So we need to push this product to our warehouse in Boston because, we're forecasting that we're going to sell 10,000 of these widgets, but we only have 4,000, right, in the warehouse. And so the value of cloud, to sort of summarize, one is shared responsibility, right? You can offload some of that heavy lifting of building and managing data centers, which two opens up opportunities for you to invest in other areas, right? Like data science, like machine learning, and building highly resilient and available applications. And from a seller perspective, right, in the Google world, for example, you can sell anything to anyone almost, right?
This is what I wanted to dig into. What is it like to sell cloud at Google, for example? Because it's different than SaaS. A lot of the audience is seeing SaaS out of the box application. It's a little simpler. This cloud's a little more, that's cloud, right? It's a flavor of cloud, but infrastructure, database, network storage, the Legos to build applications, there's complexity. And there's also opportunity when you challenge yourself to sell that type of solution. So tell us about what the difference is of selling in the world of cloud.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, right? To your point, in the world of SaaS, you have a product, you have a specific target market, you usually have a specific business function that you're
selling the HR to solve a specific pain point, or to the sales team, like a CRM, like HubSpot. Anyways.
Exactly. And what's interesting and different about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service is that you're not selling to the users, right? You're selling to the technology teams.
Yeah.
You're trying to help them do their job better, faster, in a more automated way, in a more scalable way, right? And so both the challenge and what I love about selling, Google Cloud is that I can go into almost any conversation feeling confident that there's something that I can talk about with them and that I can sell them, right? So whether we're talking about traditional infrastructure, databases and servers, right? Whether we're talking about data warehouse modernization, right? And machine learning and AI, there's a million different directions where you can go. And the company is always going to have some sort of need, right? If it's not infrastructure, it's security. If it's not security, it's data. If it's not data, it might be AI, right? And if it's none of those things, maybe it's development and developer operations, right? That they want to optimize.
So when you mentored me when I started at Google, you taught me, Chris, in your first discovery call with the CEO, the CTO, VP of engineering, figure out business objectives and initiatives, and then also technical initiatives or challenges. And I'm not doing it the same service that you would. So let's dig into, remember you coach me on that high level, like that, the framework for when you have a first conversation, especially in the world of cloud.
Absolutely. So this is particularly relevant with this Gen AI revolution that's been happening, right? So I see a lot of companies, a lot of folks try to take a technology and force it into problems, right? And it's almost like taking a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
And so my big thing is you always want to start with a business problem, right? Is there a process that's inefficient? Is there a process that's breaking, right? And so the way I think about it is you need to build some sort of business justification, right? Like what is something going to do for the business? And that argument is going to be supported by, at a high level, two things: the technical argument and then the financial argument, right? But the big thing to keep in mind is that those things are supporting the business justification, and you have to have a business reason to adopt technology and implement it, right? And so when I go to build a deal with a CTO, right, or with a CEO for that matter, I don't go in saying, hey, um, I can get you a discount. What I say is, hey, you've been using Google Cloud for a while. Your spend has been growing. It feels like you have some potential to optimize, and Google could potentially invest back in your business through a commercial agreement, right? Have you thought about that before? Is cost optimization something that's important to you? Do you want to accelerate technical projects, which is something that I can do through my contract, right? And so you almost build a mutual partnership, which is essentially what it is, right? And
Yes.
help them understand that it's not just a transactional relationship, at least not with Google, right? That's not what we're trying to establish. It's much more an advisor relationship, right? And so I'm helping you understand how our contracting functions. I'm helping you understand what levers we can pull. And then I want you to make sure that if you're going to keep using this technology, that you get the best financial terms that you can relative to your usage, right? But it all starts with the business. And so, yeah, thank you
Yes.
for bringing that up.
And I've come across startups that are trying to raise their next round of funding, and they want to free up cash runway to be more profitable and look more attractive for their next fundraising raise. So to your point of tying to business problems, that's an example of cost optimization tying in and being relevant. And what I love that you highlighted is that in the world of cloud, you truly are a trusted advisor. You're building a growth-oriented partnership. So what you're doing is really creative, innovative, and it's strategic. It's not transactional. Let me sell you this thing quickly so I can get paid. It's like, let's find out how we grow over the long term, help you drive revenue, be more efficient as a business. And you're truly being groomed to be, a business owner, a CEO yourself. But by the way, what's your vision? Let's click into that real quick. Are you using this path to go full into entrepreneurship, or what's your plan?
Yeah, that's still my eventual plan, right? I will say I do have a daughter, right? And she's still pretty
Okay.
young. And so,
Oh.
biding my time and trying to save up and learn as much as I can until, she, let's say, go off to college.
And
So
what's
I
her
can
name
take some
again?
risks. Lily.
Lily. Oh, love that name. Okay. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the vision, right? And so when I think about like getting there, I try to map out what are the specific skills and what's the specific experience that I need in order to get to where I'm trying to go. And so earlier on in my Google career, right, I thought, okay, so if I want to build a startup eventually, I should probably work with some startups, right? I should probably spend time with CEOs, with CTOs, with CMOs
Mm,
who work in startups to get a sense of their challenges, their needs, their pains, right? So that I can sort of get ahead of that and learn from that, so that I don't make the same mistakes they might make, for example. And so I've been pretty much laser focused on working with startups ever since I've been at Google.
yeah.
I've been mentoring for their accelerator program, which is where you get paired with a group, a startup, for 10 weeks and coach them on different topics like building a team and go to market strategy and cloud infrastructure and these kinds of things. Um, and where I want to go immediately next, I'm not too sure because I'm really happy right now.
I love that.
From a career perspective, right? So I'm working with the kinds of companies I want to work at. I'm covering a market that I want to cover. Um, and the technology is fantastic, right? So I don't necessarily have like any
Mm,
need in the short term, right, to go anywhere necessarily. But I think that also speaks to Google's culture around 20% projects, right? Like giving folks space to go out and do work that they find meaningful and fulfilling, that might not necessarily be directly related to their core role. And so a lot of my work with startups, right, outside of my core role has been through the 20% projects and through the Google for Startups programs, which have been, amazing to be a part of, and learn from those folks.
What a great example of being intentional with your career path, knowing that you want to be a startup founder, grow a startup, choosing to go to a company like Google, working directly with startups yourself so you can learn about their businesses. You're getting all these at bats. You're seeing different flavors of business. You're learning what's working and what doesn't, because I bet some of your customers might have hit roadblocks and things might not have worked out and others are booming. So that is a nugget. And you also started to share a nugget about why the Google culture is special. You mentioned 20% projects. If you could just share what that really is for the audience, that'd be helpful for them to know. It might be kind of exciting for them to hear. And then from there, we can talk a little bit about other aspects of the Google culture that you love. And then we're going to get back into your journey into Google, the reality of what it took to actually get a job, interviewing, all that stuff, the meat and potatoes, and even managing an SDR team at Google. So we have a lot to unpack. So first off, 20% projects. What's that all about?
Great question. It's easily one of my favorite parts, right, of Google culture. And it's this idea that folks will be more motivated and contribute more to the company as a whole if they have the freedom and the space, assuming they're performing well in their core role, naturally, right, to go out and explore and contribute to other parts of Google, right? And so the 20% specifically, that nomenclature, right, comes from a time allocation. So if you work 5 days a week and you dedicate 20% of your time to a specific project, then on average, the idea would be, right, that you spend a day a week or 8 hours a week, right, on that project. We also have, 5% projects and 10% projects, depending on the program and the needs and those kinds of things. But what's fantastic about it, right, is that I can go mentor, a company, a security company, and spend 10 weeks with their CEO and their CTO and help them think through their architecture, think about how to break into the Google ecosystem, learn about, their background and their technology and how they can help my clients potentially, right, which is tremendously meaningful. But there are folks who use that time to work with Code to College, right, and help underrepresented groups get coding skills. There's people who do that work with Google.org, our nonprofit arm, right, and help nonprofits implement technologies and learn from the Google way of doing things. So it's really is amazing, right, in that we do have that freedom and that space to sort of venture out and explore and find ourselves to a certain extent.
So when I was at Google, I loved the food. I was even there on the weekends. I had a bachelor fridge with some, at the time when I was drinking Coronas in my actual fridge at home and eggs, and that was it because I was going in the Google office at times, and it was amazing. I love the people like yourself that push me to be better and make me feel honestly a little insecure because I'm like, Bruno's so brilliant. Oh my gosh. But that's healthy because that's where you want to be, right? And the fact that Google provided Google would fund, like, if I want to do a leadership development seminar that could actually help me show up better as a teammate and perform better in the role, they could fund at least a portion of it. Those are some of the things I liked. So outside of the 20% projects, what other aspects of the culture or the perks do you love the most?
Oof.
I hit a lot of them, but I wanted to also spark ideas. So
yeah. Well, I mean, food, right? Like, especially in the world of today, is pretty huge because we have a lot of options. A lot of them are really healthy.
Can I please come to the office soon? Like, that's the cool thing. I'm a Google partner now. So
no, seriously, let me know.
Okay. Anyways, it's awesome. Anyways,
so the food's amazing. So we also have an internal program called I don't know if I can say the name. I'm sure it's just like a nonsensical name, but called Lyra, where it's a platform that you can leverage to get in touch with specialists across things like mental health, financial advisement, and legal advisement, right? It's not necessarily going to completely replace the need of, hiring a lawyer, for example, if you have a big issue, but it does give you sort of like a first line of defense, right, when it comes to those kinds of issues. And so to give you all some context, right, a couple of years ago, I was preparing to go down to Brazil. We were going to go see, my extended family. I was feeling a little bit nervous about it, right? It was still sort of in the middle of COVID and there was a lot of things going on, but my grandparents are older, right? I wanted them to meet my daughter. And so I did, like 2-3 weeks of counseling, right? Of a therapy essentially to sort of sort through my thoughts and organize them a little bit and help me, think through some of like the darker corners of it so that I could get myself mentally to a place where I would be excited and enjoy my time in Brazil right?
I love that.
I mean,
and thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. It did end up being a little bit scary because at the time you needed to have a negative COVID test to fly back into the United States. And Brazil actually has like a fantastic healthcare system randomly enough, but it's fantastic, right? Almost every street corner in Rio, for example, right, has like a pharmacy. But I was running around to like 10 different pharmacies trying to get an appointment. And eventually I did find one, right? And we managed to make it back after that. But yeah, therapy helps.
I'm glad you brought that up because when I was at Google in the pandemic, I got a promotion to go into field sales like yourself in the corporate segment in LA.
Yeah.
And as a serial extrovert, if you can't tell, I love people. I'm a chatterbox. And being locked down like that in a new city in LA where I didn't have a lot of friends, I actually did fall into a depression. And Lyra, wow, what a gift that Google provided access to counseling through that platform and complimentary sessions. So that is really important. And I just think caring for our mental and emotional well-being and making that investment is so important, you know? So, okay, let's transitioning now. Let's talk about your journey. We're happy. No, but no, I think part of happiness too, though, is distinguishing when we're not feeling well and like just accepting and not pulling again, resisting feeling bad, you know, just in caring for ourselves. So let's talk about the meat and potatoes of your journey getting into Google. I know it wasn't an overnight journey, so walk us through the reality. And then we're going to dig into, I'd like to probe into the interview process, some nuggets on like maybe interesting questions you were asked and tips to succeed. So first off, let's talk about the journey.
Sure. I'll start with college because that sort of like sets the groundwork and I think gives folks a more realistic understanding of what it is to actually interview and go through hiring.
Let's just to interrupt you. I love this. Let's be realistic.
Exactly.
Because I think sometimes people say, oh, you can get into tech sales in 2 weeks or, you know, but at a company like Google, let's give a realistic picture of what it took. Yeah.
100%. So coming out of college, right, I got a job here in Austin for a cybersecurity company. They had recently been acquired by a private equity firm based out of Austin called Vista Equity. And their whole approach to this, to private equity, right, is they'll find companies in California that have really, really good software, really good channel, right, so strong fundamentals, but might be struggling, right, from like a cost or an operational perspective, right? There's inefficiencies that they can solve for. And so what Vista did is they bought out a company called WebSense. They brought it over to Austin and rebuilt the entire team and implemented their sort of like set of best practices, right? And I would say like that's the first big meaningful step in me going towards Google, right? And the reason I say that is one, they had a phenomenal training program, right? And this is something that unfortunately I've been noticing is becoming less common, right, in tech sales. But the Vista model is we'll hire young and we'll train them up to be the best, right? And then we'll push them out to market. The idea being if you can train someone extremely well, they could be on par, if not outperform, someone who just has a lot of experience, right? But not sort of like that strong foundation. And so we spent 3 months in that training room, right? We spent a month learning process, a month learning product, a month doing role playing and quizzes and all these kinds of things, right? And after that 3 months, I felt completely confident talking to a CTO or a CISO about their security posture, what's changed about the internet, and why they need different and a more modern approach to security and technology, right?
Yeah. So training is critically important. And as folks look to break into tech sales, finding a first launch pad where you get good training, the value of that can't be underestimated. You know, I went into Oracle and they have a great training program similar to what you described. I forget, you know, we had 2 weeks in San Francisco, but then ongoing training, and we might have had a more strenuous training program for a certain number of months, but that helped shape me so much. And another thing you hit on, you're implying is that you didn't go right to Google. You found a good company, got good training, and that helped you launch. And again, the same thing with me with Oracle. I don't know if I would have been able to get into Google right away, you know. So, anyways, back to your journey. What happened next?
Yeah, I got cocky.
Okay. Oh, I didn't expect that.
Yeah. So, The training program was phenomenal. I spent, I want to say like 6, maybe 9 months in a BDR role,
Yeah.
right? But because they were transitioning the company and they were rebuilding it, right, there was a lot of opportunity for growth. They were hiring for all kinds of roles, new business, inside sales roles, account management, inside sales roles, field roles, right? And because of that transition, the 2 enterprise reps that I was supposed to be supporting quit. And so I effectively became the one of maybe a couple resources, right, that were dedicated to the Canadian market, both public and private sector, and essentially had to navigate, a lot of those conversations, renewals, expansions, and the like, right? And so, I mean, that experience was phenomenal. I was even calling into like intelligence agencies trying to get renewal information, and they were really mad that I had their phone number because they're like, "How do you even have this?"
Yeah,
it's like, "Oh, it's in my database. You're a client."
That's
right?
a tough cold call to make.
Yeah, it's a very tough cold call. I wonder if they opened a dossier on me or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But and so that experience was fantastic, right? And so after a few months doing that, they thought that I had potential, particularly for new logo acquisition, right, new business. And so normally the promotion sort of path would be, SDR, account management, and new logo acquisition. But they're like, you know what, this guy, he's a go-getter. He's trying really hard. He actually likes security and loves talking about it, kind of thing, right? Let's see how he does in the new logo space. It was tough. The first 3-6 months were really, really hard. Anyone who's done a new business role understands that the first 3 to 6 months you have to pound the pavement really, really hard, and you're not necessarily going to get the results that you want right away because it might take 12 months, it might take 18 months, it might take 24 months, right, depending on the circumstances and the accounts that you cover. But I did pretty well. I found a niche for myself, right, which was working with banks in particular. And my patch was the Northeast, and I got a lot of momentum in Connecticut, and so I ended up, knocking out a few deals with a few different banks, and that's where the cockiness comes in, right? I was like, oh man, I can do this, I can do anything, I can sell anything, right? And so I decided to go explore the startup world, and that's where, in retrospect, staying there for a year or two would have made a little bit more sense to make sure I really develop a stronger foundation, right, before taking a big risk. But it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. I really liked the company. But, unfortunately, it didn't end up working out, and it triggered sort of this pond hopping situation for me, right, where, you had a great job, then you go to a startup, and then the startup doesn't work out, and you're like, man, now what do I do? And so, naturally you start applying, you start interviewing, you get a job that you don't really like, but it's money. And then you get another job and you like it a little bit better and it's better money. And then of course that's, I guess the long way to come around to Google is they started building up an inside sales office here in Austin. And so my first experience was a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn actually because of my Portuguese language skills, right? Being born in Brazil and speaking Portuguese is my first language. They were covering all of North and South America from Austin, right, as the inside sales hub. Because from a time zone perspective, right, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Because, Central can cover West and East Coast. And I interviewed for the Brazil job twice. And when I say interview twice, I mean I went through the whole interview process at Google twice, right? So that means going through the 4 different interviews, coming on site.
Quick pause. Let's go into the interview process right now, and then we'll continue the story. So what are the steps for the Google Cloud world?
Sounds great. So for folks who aren't familiar, right, there's a few set of like specific things that Google interviews for, and this is public knowledge, right? You can look it up on YouTube. Recruiters have videos on this. And there's articles on this, right, on TechCrunch and Wired and these kinds of things. And so I'm not really divulging anything secret, but
we want you to, though.
Right?
Yeah.
The rubrics, I don't know, because I haven't, been interviewing myself, right? But
people are literally singing to get into Google because I sang "Lean on Me" in my final Googliness interview, and I told that, lean on me. And I told the interviewer, I'm like, I'm sorry you had to hear that. Like, just trying to be authentic, be myself, make them laugh. And I'm like, has anyone ever ever sang for you before? And he said, well, his name was Bryce Buffalo, a SRE engineer or something like that.
Yeah,
and he said, someone actually tap danced for me. So anyways, people are singing and dancing their way to try to get into Google. So, okay, back to the story.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. Right? Like essentially, you
people
have to
want to
stand
get
out
in
from the crowd somehow, right? But you have to do it in an authentic way that's true to yourself. But let's put a pin on that note specifically. So, if you're going into a go-to-market role for Google, right, or at least cloud specifically, right, is what I can speak to. There's sort of like 4 things that you go through as part of the interview process, right, or 4 buckets of interviews. It's role-related knowledge, right? So that's going to be more your nuts and bolts, right? Do you know how to prospect? Do you know how to build a go-to-market strategy, right? Like if you're given a bad situation with a client, how would you handle that kind of thing, right? Just like nuts and bolts sales stuff.
Yes.
And technical knowledge, right, for the role. 2 is leadership, right? And this is a little bit more, how do you work with people? How do you overcome difficult situations internally, right? Like more situational type stuff. The 3rd would be general cognitive ability.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
That's a tough one.
Do you remember your question? I remember a couple I got.
I think I do remember it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I do remember it.
Okay. Well, I don't work at Google, so I'll just share real quick. My understanding is the cognitive ability interviews they're like consulting questions where they want to see how you solve problems and how you think. You don't need a perfect answer, but just to give the audience a taste, I got 2 questions. One is, imagine there's a dying newspaper company and you're a private equity firm and buy them out. What do you do to turn the business around? And of course, what they're looking for is to connect. It's actually relevant to the role of selling cloud, right? I talked about digital transformation, reinventing a business through cloud, and we don't need to get into that. So there was a rhyme and reason behind that question, but that's an interesting one, and that's an intimidating one. So you really maybe we should talk for a second about what you do when you get those questions. And other one though, just to throw it out there, is imagine you're in the legal department, there's a new tool being implemented, and people are pushing back. How do you get them to adopt it? That's a change management problem, because when you implement cloud, people are going to be, maybe they don't have the expertise at an organization. You have to help a prospect, a customer, adapt to that change and implement it, and help them with their own internal changes. So quick pause on these cognitive abilities questions. What's your advice on how to handle a question like that, especially if at first you're like, oh crap?
Take your time. Take your time and take notes, right? The first thing that I do when I get a GCA question, right, the general cognitive ability question, is I probably spend like 1 to 2 minutes just thinking through the problem, taking down some notes, and coming up with some follow-up questions. And so asking clarification questions is absolutely something that you can do in a GCA interview, right?
Yeah.
And I might even, say that it's encouraged, right? Because
I'd agree with that.
Ultimately, where you're trying to understand from the interviewer side of things is, can this person problem solve in a world where there's ambiguity, right? And, Google in particular likes to hire folks who thrive in ambiguity specifically,
yes.
right?
Things are changing all the time. I mean, you're selling right now, next year, things are going to change. Incentive structures, segments. Oh my gosh, anyways.
Teams, yeah. That's right. Yeah. You have to be ready for change, right? Because so a big part of Google culture, for context, folks who don't come from the technology background, right, is this idea of an agile culture. And an agile culture is a culture where you iterate very quickly and you take a lot of chances and you try things out, right, and move quickly. And so for someone who likes, sort of like this job where you're consistently doing the same thing over a very long period of time and there's not a lot of ambiguity and there's not a lot of change, they're going to have a little bit of a tougher time at Google, just because consistency isn't what you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
a lot of the time. And so through GCA, through these sort of like problem solving type questions, we're trying to understand, can this person implement a structure around a problem, right? How do they think through that problem? How do they get to a solution? And then whenever we poke holes in that solution, how do they adjust, right? How do they take that feedback and then incorporate that feedback into their, problem solving pitch, essentially, right? And so it's something that until you go through it for the first time, right, it can be challenging and a little bit overwhelming, but once you practice, and that's how I got through it, right, was practice. I had to go through it multiple times.
Yeah.
You get more and more comfortable with it, kind of thing.
And what I remember is it doesn't hurt to propose a few potential solutions, but like you said, just take a step back, ask questions. You're showing curiosity. You're not rushing to jump to a conclusion. And you just show a thoughtful line of questioning and thinking, and propose a few solutions, and you don't have to be perfect. Now, clearly you prepared a lot, and I did too, by the way, to be successful. And I think preparation is a key to success in getting a job.
Absolutely.
Which I'd argue is a sales cycle where we're the product and the company we're applying to is the buying, the target company buying us, the product.
Makes sense.
And it's the same in like actually closing deals out in the field in sales. So preparation is key. I'd like to walk through the level of preparation that you put in, and what I'll say real quick, throwing myself in there, is I spent about a month actually preparing for interviews, and I network with people at Google to get an idea of the questions, answers to the test. So that was an example of my level of preparation. How about yourself?
I would agree with that, right? I'm a big bookworm, right? Like I'm the guy who, whenever I'm preparing for a test, I don't necessarily want to be in a group talking about the test questions, right? Like I'm the guy who's like reading through the textbook and highlighting this important phrases and then copying them down on paper to like get them into long-term memory, right? So I'm a big sort of like documentation type preparation person. But I'm also big into application preparation, right? And what I mean by that is if you want to interview at Google, go interview at Facebook. Go interview at Amazon. Go interview with Microsoft. Go interview with a startup down the road. Go interview with the coffee shop around the corner, right? Because the interview process in and of itself is something that's you need to develop, right? Like there are specific skills, there are specific questions that people ask, there are specific ways that they want questions answered. And so exposure is going to help you with that, right? Experience. And then of course I want to like learn as much of it as I possibly can, right? And so from a book perspective, right, like what I did to prepare was I read up on the technologies, I created a cheat sheet for Google Cloud, I learned about infrastructure as a service. I learned about platform as a service. I learned about software as a service. I learned about all the different tools within G Suite, right? I learned about some of the hexagons, right, for the Google Cloud platform. And so that was extremely helpful, and that gives you a really solid foundation of like what you can say, right? And then the tricky part is after you have that strong foundation is what to say when and how to say it. And that's where, for me, right, experience really, really helps in getting exposure and interviewing. And so when I was interviewing for Google, I was also interviewing for other companies, right, simultaneously, especially because the process did drag out for a good 8 months, right? So, the first time I came in for the interview process, right, I did GCA, I passed. I did RRK, I passed. I did, leadership and Googliness. And then for some reason, the feedback came back, negative. And so, I, figured, okay, this isn't it. Maybe this Brazil role wasn't for me. And deep down in my heart of hearts, right, I kind of felt like a little bit of a fraud. Not because I didn't feel like I would be able to learn the technical skills and be a good seller, more because I felt like my Portuguese language skills weren't up to par to be able to execute at a business level, right? Like, people would be able to tell that I have the vocabulary of a third grader. Which is tough, right? When you're trying to build credibility in a sales cycle,
yes.
And you don't even have the language skills, let alone, the background type of thing. But that was, the first month or two of my interview process with Google was going through that. Surprisingly, right, a few weeks later, they call me back up and they say, hey, we rejected you the first time around, but you're actually, one of the better candidates that we interviewed. We have more headcount to cover Brazil. Why don't you come back in, go through the whole interview process again? We'll get a new round of interviewers. Maybe the new interviewers, right, will give you better feedback than the first round. And then, you can join us for lunch at the Google office, right?
That's nice. Yeah.
That was a nice touch. And then sure enough, I come in, I go through the whole process. I'm feeling more confident. I'm feeling more comfortable. I feel like I do a better job, right? I'm not like sweating like I was the first time kind of thing. But again, right, it didn't work out. And, this is like 5-6 months into after the first interview. And at that point, right, I basically decide, okay, so I guess this isn't going to be the right role for me. Let me do what I can with the company that I'm in. I end up getting promoted from, the SMB team to the enterprise team and work with, the enterprise reps in the startup. So, things are chugging along. Life is going good. I can't complain too much. But sure enough, I hear from a friend who worked on the same sort of like team, same sort of role, right, the inside sales org, but was actually on the Canadian team. Lo and behold, they need someone who speaks French. And there aren't that many fluent French speakers in Texas generally, right? But also with like a sales background and skills, and who is a Canadian citizen, right? And like all these kinds of things. And so I realized like, man, this is probably my best chance to like actually get into Google. So I start, brushing up on my French. And for context, right, folks, I have a dual
citizenship.
That too, a dual citizenship, Canadian Brazilian, right? But I did a dual major in college.
Oh, okay.
And so I did international studies, and I picked French as my foreign language. So I studied abroad there. Spent a year in Normandy, right? Amazing experience. They have one of the best French speaking programs for Anglophones, right? People who are English speakers. I even taught English at like a middle school there, which was amazing. All this to say, although French wasn't necessarily my top two languages, I did have more experience operating at a business level with French. And so that ended up being sort of like the magic thing that got me the job at Google to a certain extent, right? The tech and security background was huge, right? How comfortable I was in the interview process was really big. But then, of course, right, that language school in particular was something that they were looking for. And I think back about like what was so different about the third interview round, right? If we kind of like put aside the culture and the language. And it was the hiring manager, right? Like the hiring manager for the Brazil role, I didn't really vibe with them well, to use, I guess, more modern terminology, right?
It's an Austin term.
Yeah, it's an Austin term, yeah. I wasn't really feeling it, right? It wasn't the right vibe. But when I met the hiring manager for the Canada role, like her and I, we just like clicked, right? She was passionate. She was energized. She was, a longtime Googler. And so she was a little bit more googly, right, than some of the other folks that I had interviewed with. And what she told me that really jumped out about my interview with her, I want to say we did GCA, was that I was like one of the only people who ever got up out of the chair, went up to the whiteboard, like drew a chart and then used images to help explain my reasoning, right? And for her, she was like, that was huge for me, right? Because like when you're explaining something financial to me or to a customer for that matter, if they're not an analyst, right, like just a raw data feed isn't going to be enough. They're going to need charts. They're going to need line graphs. They're going to need something that points up and to the right to show that revenue is going to grow over time type of thing, right?
Yes.
And so that's what stuck out to her, right, was one, how passionate I was about technology, right? But two, my willingness to, go outside of like the normal bounds of a traditional interview, right? And be like, okay, I need a whiteboard to explain this. Here, follow me on this journey as I sort of like explain my reasoning and walk you through my thought process, right? And I think that in particular, right, is what really jumped out in that interview. And it was something that I hadn't done in any of the other ones, right? Maybe I didn't feel as comfortable. Maybe I didn't feel as confident. But it's just something that came to me in the moment. It's like, no, this is how I need to explain this. And it was perfect for the hiring manager at that point. And yeah, I got the job covering Eastern Canada for the ISR team.
What an achievement. You'll always be able to say wherever you go in your career, X Google, you made it. But passion, creativity, persistence helped you land a job finally at a dream company that everyone wants to get into. And another thing that I think helped you succeed, it seems, is authenticity. And one thing I think of is the Googliness interview round, right? I just want to tie a bow on interviewing with Google by talking about Googliness. I remember they'd say, bring your full self to work. And obviously in my Googliness interviews, when I sang, and just let's tie a bow on this interviewing piece by talking about what is the Googliness interview all about, and like what type of question might you get?
Yeah, that's tough, right? Because I think Googliness can mean different things to different people. But I think at its very, very core, right, it's like a hunger for problem solving and a willingness to work with anyone from anywhere, right? And being respectful, of course, of other people's cultures and backgrounds. The only thing that I might edit, right, because I think you're right, people do say bring your full self to work, but I'm starting to be a little bit more of a fan of bring your best self to work.
I like that.
Because there's parts of me that I probably shouldn't bring to work.
Hey, that is actually a really good point. And just off, I agree with that. Like, authenticity isn't an excuse to not invest in yourself or work on yourself, basically, is what I'm getting. Exactly, but I love that. I love that.
And as an extension of that, right, I think DEI is important, right? Like being respectful and having different backgrounds
yes.
and ways of thinking, right? I think something that I'm really excited about right now within Google and the broader society accepting is the idea of neurodiversity, right? Like there is no normal brain, right? There's just a distribution of human brains, and some of them are a little bit more in the middle, and some of them are a little bit more this way, and some are
my brain's crazy.
We're all weird in our own way,
seriously.
Right? Like normal doesn't exist, average doesn't exist.
Guess what?
Right? It's a statistical concept.
I love this, by the way, because Jace Strasberg, one of our buddies, you know Jace?
Yeah,
he's at my YouTube team. He did say once, like, Chris, I would love to get an fMRI scan in your brain to see what's going on in there. Seriously, this one of my Google teams said that. I love what you're saying about diversity of brains. It's so true.
Yeah. And I think like it's helpful to think about that in that biological sense, because then you can sort of extrapolate from that biology, right, the cultural aspect that, just because you're an American doesn't mean you're going to be good at marketing, right? Like just because you're Italian doesn't mean you're going to be good at building cars, right? And so getting away from that, very stereotypical approach to people and to building teams, right? Where a culture fit is what you're looking for, right? Someone who fits the mold. And what I'm really excited about, which we've already started doing at Google, is moving towards this concept of a culture add, right? Like what does this person bring to the table, bring to the team that maybe we don't have and would be a complement to what we have, right? It's, it's adding a little, I guess an example is like a fusion, right? A cuisine fusion, right?
Yes.
It's like, we're making hamburgers, but let's try something different, right? Let's throw a brie instead of a cheddar cheese on it, right? Like, let's sprinkle on some jelly.
Dude, you're making me hungry. Come on, I haven't eaten anything. Yeah, okay. So I don't know how much time we have left because there's another podcast coming in after this. So rapid fire, 5 more questions to bring it home. Okay, and the first 2 are related to succeeding as an SDR at Google Cloud. You manage a team of SDRs, and most of this audience wants to break into tech sales as an SDR and cut their teeth in sales. So what did you look for when you interviewed for SDR candidates? What did you look for in your team members?
Great question. So one is you need to have like an appetite and a mindset for taking on risk, right? And taking risks. Not necessarily jumping off a cliff, right? But an SDR is the kind of job where you're going to be reaching out to a lot of people you don't know, to a lot of strangers, and you need to be able to develop like a comfort with that, right? It's not necessarily something that's innate in us, right? To like go out and make friends with a bunch of strangers.
It's unnatural.
It's a little bit unnatural.
But success is unnatural.
But success,
come on.
Exactly. You got to break out of that comfort zone, right? So one is that's actually a better way to phrase it. It's like a willingness to break out of your comfort zone is one. 2 is operational excellence. I need to be able to trust this person to do their job without me having to micromanage them, right? Because like I hate micromanaging. I hate being micromanaged. I hate doing the micromanaging, right? So being able to trust somebody to, do the bare minimum of their job, let's say, right? Like hit those dials, log their stuff in Salesforce, right? Show up to the team meeting, right? Contribute in a positive way, be a leader on the team. I'm getting a little bit carried away, but
it's good stuff though.
It's good stuff. Operational excellence, right, is really, really important. Having a good system. I have a story for that, but maybe we can save it for the next one.
Yeah.
And then the third one is perseverance, right? Because they're not going to open the door on the first call. They're not going to open the door on the 10th email.
Agreed.
It might be 9 months. It might be 12 months before you actually break in and start building relationships into an account. And so you have to have a certain level of like mental toughness and emotional maturity to be able to not let that stuff destroy you, right? Like mentally and emotionally kind of thing. And it is a callus that you can build up over time. But you kind of have to go in it with that mindset, right? So if you do have that mindset, right, you break out of your comfort zone, you do have a level of operational excellence, right? You're willing to, I'm forgetting the summary of my.
Be persistent and gritty. You're exactly right, man. Some of my first ever deal at Oracle, 9 months of reaching out to a database administrator as an SDR, no response. In Q4, he got back $200,000 deal, something like that. And I used it to get promoted.
Beautiful.
You know, it's like, and if I gave up or thought, oh, none of it matters, what the hell, I'm just sending messages, then it would have never happened, right? But pleasant persistence and realizing that when you send emails and you reach out, they're getting an awareness of who Chris Bussing is, and they know, oh, when we have a need with Oracle, we could turn to him. It all matters. And so having like the emotional resilience and the grit to just keep going is what you were saying. So, okay, 3 more things. It's all related to mindset. You've got some great advice for folks who are early on in their career that we talked about offline. Let's dig into it to round this conversation off and tie a bow on it. Love all these metaphors. Round it off, tie a bow. Let's go. Okay, so have a vision for yourself. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So when you think about career and when you think about building skills, right, I would challenge folks to not focus around titles, but focus around more skill set, right? And so what I mean by that is, what are the skills that you want to build, right, to get to where you're trying to go? Do you want to run a ranch, right? Do you want to be a veterinarian? Do you want to be a tech CEO? Do you want to be the head of a marketing firm, right? And then based on that sort of like end goal that you're trying to work towards, right, what are the specific skills that you need to develop to get there? And so by having a vision for yourself, you kind of create the space to think strategically about your life and then make tactical decisions, like things that you do on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis to help you get to where you're trying to go, right? And so using Google as an example, if my goal is to be a field rep and I'm an inside sales rep, right? 1, I need exposure and experience managing executive relationships. And 2, I need maybe, a certification or something to help build credibility with my clients, right? And so if my vision is to be a field rep, I can identify the specific things that I need to do. And this, I think, ties into one of the points, right, of tactical impatience.
Let's talk about that next.
Let's talk about that, yeah. So you have to be patient about your strategy, right? You have to be patient about your vision. It might take you a year, it might take you 5 years, it might take you 10 years. You might work at something your whole life and never get to where you're trying to go. And then the moment that you die, you become famous, right? Which is
like famous
artists experience. Yeah. And so if the strategic portion you have to be very patient with. But what you have to be impatient about is the tactics, right? It's the things that you do to get to where you're trying to go, right? If your goal is to work for Google Cloud, right? After watching this video, go read up on the Google Cloud Digital Leader certification and go get the certification, right? Like within the next 3 to 6 months. I noticed that a lot of people will put a goal like somewhere that feels relatively close, but just out of reach, right? It's like, oh, I'll do it next month. I'll do it next year. I'll do it in 2 to 3 to 5 years, right? And then the years pass, and the next thing you know, you're 30, and then next thing you know, you're 40. And I mean, I'm not 40 yet, right? So maybe I shouldn't speak out of turn, but if you're not if you're not impatient with yourself on doing the little things, right, that you need to do to get to where you're going to go, then you're going to have a hard time making progress, right? And it goes back to that mentality of just be 1% better each day. Just do a little bit, a fraction of a percentage to make yourself better and work towards your goal. And then time, right, with compound interest essentially will be in your favor, right? Do 10 minutes of Duolingo a day, right?
Yeah.
To learn a language. That's what I'm doing with my daughter in Portuguese. And now she's starting to spit out whole sentences, and I'm so proud.
Aw, nice job, Lily. And by the way, you mentioned like artists succeeding like when they're dead. I hope I'm not 6 feet under when this channel blows up. Come on, hit that like, subscribe.
You're going to be like Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah,
right? You're going to find this, and then you're going to be like the philosophy.
Yeah, the sales philosopher.
Of like the 2050s.
Yeah, and you talked about getting Google Cloud certification. Don't you, real quick, have a book you're writing around that?
Yeah, exactly right. So I can't, necessarily plug the book quite yet, but to speak to that, so my goal and my passion in particular is helping enable people with skills that will help them build good lives, right? And
Love that.
An extension of that, cloud, right? Hopefully y'all have felt this based on this conversation, is one of those places where you can really fundamentally change your life from like a financial perspective, from a contributing to society perspective. And so as part of that mission, I'm currently working with Pact, which is a publishing company in the UK, to write a book for the Google Cloud Digital Leader certification, which is sort of like the entry-level certification from both a business and potentially even, a technology perspective for folks who want to, work their way into the Google Cloud ecosystem. And so I'm hoping to join you again here soon, where we'll be able to plug the book itself, right? Type of thing.
Yes. We'll have you back on for sure. We're going to talk about it.
I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic.
So final piece of mindset, I don't know if we hit on it, but you had mentioned something about have a survival mindset?
100%.
Yeah.
So this is something that I've been obsessing over a little bit, and it actually comes out of the conversation that I had with therapists and watching a lot of psychology videos on YouTube, right? And it's this idea that in life, there's things that you can control and there's things that you can't control, right? And I mean, this is a little bit stoicism, but the idea is that a victim is the kind of person who obsesses over things that they can't control and uses that as justification for not focusing on the things that they can control, right? And through that, you can very easily fall into depression, right? Because you feel so powerless, right? You kind of work yourself into a corner in your mind where there's nothing I can do about my life. Everything's terrible. Everything's always going to be terrible. So why would I even try, right? By contrast, a survivor mindset, right, is, okay, there's things in my life that I can and can't control. The things that I can't control are out of my power anyways, so let me just accept them for what they are and then focus on the things that I can control, because that's what's going to drive my life forward, right? And I mean, it's not necessarily easy, right? It's not like a light switch that you can flick in your head. But if you start like learning about that and focusing on that a lot more, right, you adopt, a survivor mindset, and then you go out and do the things that you can do to make your life better, right, to help yourself become a better person. So I want to ask, like, especially young people, right, as who have gone through and suffered through the COVID pandemic, right, and all the stuff that's been going on in the world since, is, you have to adopt that survivor mindset, right, to thrive in the world and to be successful. And so, I would challenge you, right, to invest in yourself and your mental health, and then, of course, adopt that survivor mindset. Focus on the things that you can control that are in front of you, right? Come up with a vision for yourself, and then what are the steps that you can take to get there? Because you can be anything you want in the world, right? You can do anything. It's just a matter of coming up with a plan, dedicating the time, building up the skills, and then executing, right? And you know this as well as I do from our sales roles. Like this, all of this stuff applies to your life as much as it applies to a sales career. And so, I'm pulling a lot from that in my personal life, but also vice versa, right? Pulling my learnings in mental health and things like that into my professional life to, hopefully be successful in the long run and not get burnt out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for this conversation, for generously sharing your heart, your insights, and lifting us all up. Guys, go out and create the life you want. Have a survival mindset. Create opportunities. Your dreams are available to you in this abundant and giving world, right? You're worthy. So as a call to action, make sure to connect with Bruno Rodriguez on LinkedIn. Stay tuned for his Google Cloud certification book coming out in the future, and for our next interview conversation that we have together. And connect with me as well, right? To your success in tech sales and in life, happy selling and happy living. And we'll see you in the next one.